That night, I confronted Mum. I laid the photograph and the printout of the article on the table. Her face drained of color. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "Does it matter?" I said. My voice was shaking, but I didn't care. "It's true, isn't it? He hurt you, and they killed Grandma." She closed her eyes, and 2 tears slipped free, trailing down her cheeks. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Yes." The air seemed to thicken between us. My heart pounded as if it would break through my ribs. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded. "Because I wanted you to have a chance," she said. "A chance to live without carrying the weight of what they did. A chance to be normal." Normal? I laughed bitterly. "Do you think I feel normal? Do you think changing my name makes me normal?" Her shoulders shook. "I was 12, Gina. 12. I thought if I buried it deep enough, it would die with me. But it never does. It never dies." Her words hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to hold her, to comfort her, but rage boiled too hot in my veins. Rage at the Marlows, at the whispers, at the lies. I wanted names, faces, justice. Over the next few weeks, I gathered everything I could. The Marlows were still powerful, richer than ever. In fact, their estate was described in glossy magazines as a Texas castle. Their philanthropy plastered across charity galas and political campaigns. And at the center of it all was Elliot Marlowe, older now, but still in the spotlight. He was running for governor. His face was on billboards, on news interviews, smiling with that polished charm that made people forget monsters don't always hide in shadows. Sometimes they shake your hand. I stared at his face one evening, glowing from the TV, and whispered to myself, "You don't get to bury us. You don't get to win." That was the moment the hunger in me transformed. No longer just curiosity. Revenge. The first time I introduced myself as Gina Marlowe. The name caught in my throat like a bone. It was at the new school. A teacher asked me to stand and introduce myself. Dozens of eyes pinned me in place. And for a second I thought about saying K2 Lawson just to hear how it sounded one last time. But then I remembered Elliot Marlowe's smile on television. The smirk of a man who believed he was untouchable. "My name is Gina," I said. The word tasted strange, but it was mine now. The class nodded politely, uninterested. No whispers. No stays. For once, I was invisible. But invisibility has its advantages. It gave me time to think, to plan. I spent the next weeks watching, listening, collecting scraps of information like puzzle pieces. I knew from the article that my grandmother's case had been buried decades ago. The police had called it a burglary. The community had been silenced, and the Marlows had walked away unscathed. But I also knew cases like that leave trails. Paperwork, witnesses, people who had once known the truth but had learned to bury it deep. I just had to find them. One evening, while Mum was working late, I pulled out the envelope again, the photograph of her as a child between my grandparents. I studied the house behind them, its peeling paint and sagging roof. Maybe someone in that neighborhood still remembered. The thought of going back terrified me, but the hunger inside me outweighed the fear. So one Saturday, I boarded a bus back to the town we'd left behind. My heart thumped as the familiar streets rolled past. The grocery store, the church, the schoolyard swing. Everything looked smaller than I remembered, but the whispers in my memory made it feel suffocating. I found the house from the photograph easily. The paint had faded to gray, the windows boarded up. My grandmother's house, abandoned, left to rot like her memory. But the neighbor's porch light was on. An older woman sat rocking in a chair, knitting in her lap. She looked up when she saw me. "You are Lena's girl," she said, before I even spoke. Her words froze me. "You knew my mother." She nodded slowly. "I knew all of you. I was here when it happened." When? That single word carried the weight of everything my mother had tried to hide. The woman's name was Mrs. Carter. Over lukewarm tea, she told me pieces of the story my mother had never shared. "Your grandmother was brave," she said. "Braver than most. When she went to the police, we thought maybe this time would be different. But the Marlows, they own this town. Money, connections, fear. They've always had it." The threats started almost immediately. Strange cars parked outside. Phone calls in the night. And then, she was gone. "Gone?" I echoed, my throat tight. "Shut," Mrs. Carter whispered. They called it a robbery, but nothing was taken. Nothing. We all knew what it was. But no one dared speak. Not after that. I clenched my fists beneath the table. And Elliot Marlowe. Her knitting needles stilled. Still breathing. That man's evil seeps into everything he touches. And now he wants to run the whole state. Her words settled into me like iron. On the bus ride back, I thought about my grandmother. Brave enough to speak. Punished for her courage. I thought about my mother. Silenced by trauma. Forced to build her life in the shadows. And I thought about me. I wasn't going to be silenced. When I got home, I opened a blank notebook and wrote 3 words on the first page. Bring them down. It became my private manifesto. Each night, I added more notes, names, connections I pieced together from old articles and scraps of gossip. The Marlowes had a long history of scandals swept under expensive rugs, bribery accusations, accidents involving rivals, donations to politicians who conveniently looked the other way. But what they had done to my family, that was personal. Still, I knew I couldn't take them on alone. Help came in the form of a stranger. It happened at the library. I was digging through more archives when a woman slid into the chair across from me. She was in her 30s, sharp-eyed, with a voice like steel. "You're Elena's daughter, aren't you?" she said. The sound of my mother's real name startled me. "Who are you?" "Elena," she said, sliding a business card across the table. It read, "Investigative journalist. I've been chasing the Marlowes for years," she continued. "Every lead dries up. Every witness vanishes. But then I saw you, looking up their history. I thought, maybe you're ready to finish what your grandmother started." I stayed at her, my pulse racing. She was offering exactly what I needed: knowledge, resources, a way forward. But it also terrified me. "Why me?" I whispered. "Because you have more to lose than anyone, and more to gain." That night, I tucked her card into my notebook. My manifesto wasn't just words anymore. It was a plan. I was Gina Marlowe now. And Gina wasn't just going to survive. She was going to make them pay. The first time I stepped into a courthouse, my knees nearly gave way. The building itself felt like a fortress. Columns stretching high, flags snapping in the wind, doors so heavy I had to lean my weight against them. Inside, the air smelled of old wooden paper. The echoes of arguments past still hanging in the walls. Elena walked beside me, steady as stone. She had arranged everything. The meeting with the prosecutor, the motions to reopen the case. Without her, I would have been just another girl with a notebook full of anger. With her, I was a witness. "Remember," she whispered as we waited outside the courtroom, "they'll try to break you down. The Marlowes have money, lawyers, influence. But you have the truth. That's heavier than all their gold." I nodded, clutching my notebook to my chest. My manifesto, now swollen with photocopies of old articles, sworn statements Elena had dug up, even faded police reports. The courtroom filled with people, reporters, townsfolk, curious strangers. And then them. The Marlowes entered like royalty, Elliot at the center, his hair silvered now, his suit immaculate. He smiled as though this were another campaign rally, not a hearing about his crimes. His brothers flanked him, his wife on his arm. When his eyes met mine, something cold slithered down my spine. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked amused, as if he'd seen 1,000 girls like me try to topple him before. The prosecutor began by laying out the case: my grandmother's death, my mother's abuse, the decades of silence. The defense scoffed, calling it ancient history, accusing us of dredging up lies for political gain. Then came the witnesses. The first was Mrs. Carter. She walked slowly to the stand, but her voice was strong. "I remember the night Margaret died," she said. "We all knew it wasn't a robbery. She had just reported the assault. She told me she feared for her daughter's life. The threats were real. And then she was gone." The defense lawyer leapt up. Objection. Speculation. But the judge allowed her to continue. Next came a man I didn't recognize, the Marlowe's former driver. His hands shook as he spoke, his gaze darting to Elliot like a beaten dog waiting for a kick. I drove Mr. Marlowe many nights. To hotels. To parties. I saw him with girls. Some were young. Too young. His voice cracked. I kept silent because silence paid well. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Cameras clicked like gunfire. The defense tried to discredit him, waving signed confidentiality agreements, accusing him of perjury. But the cracks were showing. When it was my turn, my legs trembled so badly I thought I might collapse. But then I saw Elliot leaning back in his chair, smirking, and fire rose in me. I told him everything I knew. My childhood of whispers. The passports. The photograph. The article. My grandmother's murder. My mother's silence. They buried her once, I said, my voice steady now. They won't bury her again. For the first time, Elliot's smile faltered. Cross-examination was brutal. The defense attorney threw questions like knives. You have no direct memory of these events, do you? You're relying on second-hand stories, rumors. Maybe, I admitted. But when every rumor lines up, when every silence points to the same man, that's not rumor anymore. That's truth. The judge called for recess. My mother hadn't spoken yet. She was still too fragile, too haunted. But she sat in the front row, her hands clenched white around a handkerchief. When I stepped down from the stand, she reached for me. You're stronger than I ever was, she whispered. Tears streamed down her face. Alina leaned in close. This is working. He's cracking. We just need one more push. That push came in the form of paperwork. Alina had unearthed insurance records linked to my father's death. He had been killed in a car accident, ruled mechanical failure. But the payout? Signed over to a trustee bearing the Marlowe crest. It wasn't proof of murder, but it was proof of involvement. The courtroom buzzed like a hive as the documents were presented. Elliot's lawyers shouted objections. His wife's face paled. His brothers exchanged frantic looks. For the first time, the Marlowe looked less like royalty and more like prey. When the session ended that day, Elliot stood to leave. He paused beside me, leaning in just close enough for only me to hear. You think you're winning, he murmured. This is my world, little girl. You're just visiting. His breath smelled of mint and menace that I met his gaze, unflinching. Then I'll burn it down on my way out. He walked away, but the smile never returned to his lips. That night, lying awake in the dark, I realized something. The courtroom was only the beginning. Exposing the truth wasn't enough. If I wanted justice for my grandmother, for my mother, for myself, I had to destroy the Marlowes completely. And I was just getting started. The day the verdict came, the courthouse felt like a place of weather. The floor trembled with people's footsteps. The air pressed tight with held breaths. I couldn't tell if my hands were cold from fear or from some strange kind of joy that sits like ice under the ribs. Alina squeezed my shoulder once in the hallway, and that little touch steadied me more than anything else had in months. When the jury filed back in, they moved like a train arriving. Slow, inevitable. I watched their faces one by one, trying to see the moment when certainty would settle in their eyes. The foreperson stood. The words that followed were smooth and terrible as a blade. Guilty. It was both less and more than I had imagined. Less, because a line on a paper cannot reach back and pull my grandmother from the ground or stitch up the nights my mother cried herself to sleep. More, because it made a public truth of a private horror. It attached a legal name to a lie that had been swallowed for decades. In a country that often protects those with money, that sentence read like a rebuke. Elliot Marlowe's face went slack the way a mask does when something sharp shoves it aside. For a heartbeat, he looked like any man in a bad dream, small, exposed. Then his lawyers hustled him away, voices urgent, whispering the old routines, appeals, motions, PR strategies. The machine rolled, predictably, but its gears had been dented. Outside, the crowd split like a river. Some people sobbed, others cheered. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras focused on faces. I stood very still, the sound of the city compressing into a narrow, pulsing hum. My mother was there, wrapped in a scarf she bought the week before. She looked older than her years, thinner, the muscles of care carved into her like calluses. She took my hand and I could feel it, the small, stubborn warmth that had kept us alive. You did it, she said, as if she needed to hear the truth itself to believe it. We had done it, and we hadn't. The victory was imperfect, as all real victories are. The Marlowe Foundations was subject to audits. Several trusts were frozen. Trustee accounts were subpoenaed. The mansion was listed in the news and then in legal filings. People who had once said nothing now offered apologies that fluttered like cheap fabricants and so, sometimes self-serving. But enough people's consciences rattled that the house where my grandmother had worked and died changed hands. A non-profit bought the property, citing reparation and the need to preserve workers' histories. They wanted to turn the place into a museum and education center, a place to teach labor history, to shine a light where shadows had been law. I toured it months later, when dust had been cleared and plaques installed. Walking through the rooms where servitude had once been invisible was like stepping across a threshold. The exhibit with marginal documents, pay stubs, anonymous notes, the yellowed complaint my grandmother had filed sat in a glass case. I ran my fingers against the cold of the display's edge, and for a moment I could imagine her there again, Margaret, mixing soap and courage, naming what had been done to her. But legal victories were only part of the work. The appeals came, and the Marlowes fought fiercely to reclaim narratives, to sell a softened version of themselves to the public. The media cycles churned and spat out new scandals and old sympathies.